Good day everybody, RC Grabbag here, welcome back to the channel. In my last video I worked on some new hardshell scenery for another mountain section, which really helped reshape that corner of the layout. The new mountain blends in nicely with some earlier hardshell work, and really transformed the look of the layout. And in this video I will finally be supplying power to the hidden staging tracks along with the components for DCC control. We'll then take a look at Overland Model's CNJ double-ender brass locomotives in detail, then return to the layout to begin working on the center peninsula where a large urban area will begin to take shape. And finally we'll close with the usual random topic in RC's grab bag. So with that setup, let's get started. The staging track was originally the first track I had put down on the layout several years ago. However, it's remained unpowered until now while I worked on other things. The staging track is basically 8 very long tracks, and from an electrical standpoint, each of the tracks is comprised of 2 electrically isolated sections making a total of 16 blocks. Add to that entrance and exit tracks for the staging for a total of 18 blocks. So for the entrance and exit tracks, I'll tap into some existing DCC hardware for power, but for the new 16 staging blocks, I'm going to create a new DCC control board to supply power and control. This board is exactly like 3 others that I have in play elsewhere on the layout, and they were featured in my 5th video in this series. The board consists of a power supply, a Digitrax DB220 power booster, and 2 BXP88s for block power, block detection, and circuit breaker protection. It also uses an SEC8 signal control board, also from Digitrax. And finally, there's a terminal strip for connecting the power bus wires to the board. For more information on these and other items used in this video, please see the video description below. For the bus wires, I'm using the same 14 gauge stranded wire that I've used everywhere else. And to make it easier to run the wires, I put the 2 wire rolls on this makeshift spool holder for easy dispensing. It's basically a couple of 2x4s and a scrap piece of copper pipe clamped to the layout benchwork. As I pull the wires into place, the wire easily unrolls from the spools. This particular bus wire that I'm extending is to provide power to one of the staging entrance and exit tracks. Once the bus wire is in place, I'll drop some feeders down from the track to tap into the bus wires for power. The feeder wire is 22 gauge solid core. I like the solid core wire because it's easy to shape and it holds its shape well while I'm putting it in place. Then I solder it to the side of the rails. I'm not worried about the appearance of the feeders here because the track will be hidden. For the visible track, I've soldered the feeders to the underside of the rails, where they can't be seen. In the areas where I couldn't fit a full-size drill for the feeders, I simply used a Dremel with a 90-degree fitting on it and a drill bit attached to that. I tap into the bus wires with these Scotchlok connectors, and then from the bus feeds to the track feeds with these Wago connectors. Once all the feeders are in place, I connect the bus wires to the terminal strips on the control board. As I mentioned before, this is an existing control board that had some excess capacity on it, so I'm tapping into that to power the entrance and exit tracks to the staging. So that takes care of those tracks. Now let's move on to the staging tracks themselves. For each of the 8 staging tracks, as mentioned before, they are divided into 2 electrically isolated blocks for a total of 16 blocks. So I have to run 16 pairs of bus wires for each block. The bus wiring for pretty much all the other parts of the layout basically lays on top of the benchwork, but the staging track sits directly on top of the benchwork, so I'm going to have to go through the benchwork for the wiring to keep it out of the way of the track and make it accessible. In order to make a neat job of it, I'm creating this drilling template out of a scrap piece of 1x4 pine. 8 holes are being drilled for 8 sets of wire, and I'm using the track spacing as a guide. Now I drill 8 3/8 inch holes that will serve as a guide for the holes in the benchwork that will carry the wires. Once the holes are drilled in the guide, I'll clamp the guide under the benchwork and begin drilling for the bus wire routing. Then it's back to stringing the wires through the drilled holes. Now I had dropped the feeders on the staging shortly after it was put down, so fortunately I didn't have to do that work now. So once the new bus wires were in place, I just tapped into them the same way as I've done everywhere else, with the Scotchlok and Wago connectors. So here's the new control board in place. All 16 bus wires are wired into the BXP88 power management components, and each of these has the capacity for supplying power to 8 blocks, so 2 of them conveniently covers all of the staging's 16 blocks. And like the other boards, this one is hinged so I can fold it up out of the way under the layout and hopefully keep it free of dust. I did have to install a few turnout machines on the staging tracks. I had done most of the installations, but a few were not done. For turnout control, I am using these micro servos, and these come from Tam Valley Depot, but more manufacturers are starting to provide servo-driven solutions like Walthers. When beginning a switch machine installation, I like to center the turnout points with 2 scrap ties. These servo assemblies come with double-sided foam tape to hold the assembly in place until you can get some screws in. They also have these micro switches built in to handle powering the turnout frog as needed. Now it's just a matter of lining things up, pressing the assembly to the bottom of the sub road bed, and quickly screw the assembly in place. Once in place, do a quick test of the motion. And lastly, snip the wire with some diagonal wire cutters. So with the staging wiring complete, let's take a break and have a look at Overland models CNJ double-ender locomotives in brass. Here are 2 examples of the Baldwin DR64-2000 double-ender locomotive in Central New Jersey livery. The real double-enders were produced by Baldwin in various versions from 1945 to 1948. The 2 models shown here are HO scale brass from Overland models and were produced around 1995. The orange and blue version is an early CNJ paint scheme with the green and yellow emerging later. Hope you enjoyed this look at the Overland model CNJ double-enders. Now let's get back to the layout. Now with the staging ready to go into hiding, it's time to start covering it up with plywood. This area is going to be mostly flat, maybe some subtle landscape undulations, but it will have a heavy concentration of buildings to represent a smallish, more urban setting. For the soon-to-be installed plywood, I'm installing these 1x4 risers that the plywood sections will sit on. Each riser is about 8 inches in length, and I'm using a level before permanently attaching them so the plywood will sit on top of them nice and flat. Unfortunately, the track was installed in this area before I was completely sure about what I wanted to do here. So now I have to cut the plywood into odd shapes to fit it in between the tracks. It's great if you know this stuff beforehand, but with a layout this large and it being a solo project, that's not always the case. In order to determine all these odd shapes of plywood, I just gently put the plywood sheet on top of the track, being careful not to damage it, and go under the benchwork and trace the cutout shape with a pencil. It's not super precise, but I'm not building fine furniture here either, so close enough is good enough. In an effort to use every scrap of plywood, it was impossible to avoid some gaps that needed filling with small scraps like these pie-shaped pieces here. But it is satisfying to watch them go into place. After all the plywood cookie cutting is done and the pieces are in place, it looks pretty good. You might have observed that some of the plywood sections sit lower than others, and I'll explain this in a bit. And one final step is to do some cleanup work. Now that the area is covered, I'm going to go ahead and start moving the buildings from their temporary holding spot to the new area. As far as building placement is concerned, it's random for the time being, but I'm now free to play around with their arrangement until a plan is finalized. Not all these buildings are going to go here, so many of them will be placed in other parts of the layout for different reasons. As I mentioned before, some of the plywood sections here sit lower than others. The ones that sit lower are about a half an inch below mainline track level. This is because most of the buildings my friend Carl built for me are firmly mounted on pieces of wood, diorama style. And trying to remove the buildings from these dioramas would be very difficult in most cases. So I just lowered the plywood a bit so the dioramas can be simply placed on top. And I'll fill in the spaces between the buildings with some half-inch material, like foam or more plywood or both. The area that's getting cleared of buildings is where the freight yard and passenger station tracks will go, so now work can begin in that area at any time. So there you have it, the beginnings of a small town / city. Now I can take some time to figure out how this is all going to look, but that will take some time. Well, that's it for the railroading portion of this video. If you like what you see, please hit that like button and leave a comment below. And please subscribe if you haven't already. Now it's time for RC's Grab Bag of Randomness. And this time we'll be taking a trip to the Emerald Isle. That's right, Ireland. So if you're interested, stick around. Otherwise, see you next time.
house over her father and mother before. And they each wheeled up barrow through the streets broad and narrow, crying buckles and muscles alive, alive, oh, alive, alive, oh.
This is the rain we missed. We're having hot chocolate. Chocolate saves the day once again.
That's right. See, moral of the story is it's always a good idea to stop for chocolate.
That's right. Jen, that looks lovely.
Thank you. See you.
I'm going to show you now. I'm just going to play it over.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Fighting name is Holt. Holt comes from the fighting word Hove, H-O-V-D, which means head. In 819, the Vikings raided an island just opposite Holt Harbour over there to basically to your left there, and they ransacked a monastery. They came on over the mainland here and they raided Holt Head. For the next 300 years, this whole Holt Peninsula was ruled by both the Norse and
sports people. So there on the left is Ireland's Eye with the peak. That's a nature reserve. You can walk up along there with all those where all those people are, and walk up the.
I know we're supposed to go upstairs.
That's a little early to be drinking, isn't it? Labor Day at 10 a.m. A small team. Check sleeping systems. Good luck with that.
Rains 260 days a year here, but pretty lucky this year. Right, Jen? Jen is running.
Excellent.
Feel nice and close.
You can't go there, Jen. Yeah. One of the bees living here.
I think I agree. It's very useless. Yeah. We definitely have
Got a little shelf full of cheese, my lobster bisque, and some kind of pastry. Irish know how to do it. Chocolate ice cream. Chocolate. No vanilla. What up, Jen?